2007, 8:43 in the morning in Culiacan, Mexico. A black Chevrolet Suburban pulls into the parking lot of an HSBC branch. The engine idles. Two men step out. They're wearing pressed shirts, clean jeans, cowboy boots. They look like businessmen. They look like ranchers. They look like anyone. One of them walks to the back of the vehicle and opens the trunk. Inside are 6 cardboard boxes. They are not large, about the size of a microwave, but they are heavy, dense, and they have been measured down to the centimeter to slide perfectly under the teller window inside. The man lifts the first box. He carries it through the glass doors, past the security guard who does not look up, past the customers waiting in line who do not ask questions. He sets it on the counter. The teller opens it. Inside, $500,000. Cash. United States currency, $100 bills, bundled in plastic wrap, smelling faintly of ink and something else, something chemical. The teller counts it, stamps a receipt, enters the deposit into the system. No identification is requested. No source of funds is questioned. No suspicious activity report is filed. The man returns to the Suburban. He retrieves the second box, then the third, then the fourth. By 9:15, $3 million have passed through that window. By noon, similar deposits will have been made at 14 other HSBC branches across Sinaloa State. By the end of the week, the total will exceed 47 million. This is not a robbery. This is not a heist. This is a deposit. The money belongs to the Sinaloa cartel. The boxes were designed by cartel engineers. The bank is HSBC, one of the largest financial institutions in the world. And no one will be arrested for this. Not today, not ever. But to understand how a bank becomes a cartel's private vault, you have to go back, not to Mexico, to London, not to the streets, to the boardroom, and to a man who believed he could serve God and mammon at the same time. In the late 90s, a man named Stephen Green sat in an office overlooking Canary Wharf in London. He was a banker, yes, but not the kind you imagine. He was also an ordained Anglican priest. He wrote theological essays. He delivered sermons on Sundays. In 1996, he published a book called Serving God, Serving Mammon, Christians and the Financial Markets. In it, he asked whether a person could do the Lord's work while kicking enemies on the trading floor. He believed the answer was yes. Stephen Green rose through HSBC like a quiet fire. In 2003, he became Chief Executive Officer. In 2006, he became chairman. And in 2009, while still running one of the largest financial institutions on earth, he published another book. This one was called Good Value: Reflections on Money, Morality, and an Uncertain World. He wrote about ethics. He wrote about integrity. He wrote about how the kingdom of God could be found in the thick of the markets. At the exact same time, in a city on the other side of the world, another man was building an empire of a different kind. His name was Joaquin Archibaldo Guzman Loera. They called him El Chapo, the short one. He ran the Sinaloa cartel, the largest and most violent drug trafficking organization on the planet. His product was heroin, cocaine, methamphetamine. His business model was simple: manufacture death, sell it north, and collect the cash. But the cash was a problem. Tens of millions of dollars every week in crumpled bills, stuffed into duffel bags and car trunks and hidden compartments. The American financial system was supposed to be walled off. The Bank Secrecy Act required suspicious transactions to be reported. Anti-money laundering protocols demanded scrutiny. El Chapo needed a door. He needed someone to open it. HSBC did not merely open the door. They widened it. They held it. They waved the money through. In 2002, HSBC acquired a Mexican bank called Vital. The acquisition was part of a global expansion strategy, a push to dominate emerging markets. Mexico was a prize: 40 million unbanked citizens, a growing middle class, a gateway to Latin America. But Mexico was also something else. It was the corridor through which roughly 90% of all cocaine consumed in the United States passed. It was a war zone, a place where drug traffickers had begun outgunning the police, outspending the government, and burying their enemies in mass graves. HSBC's internal protocols require that high-risk countries be flagged, monitored, scrutinized. Mexico should have been marked as such. It was not. For years, HSBC classified its Mexican operations as standard risk. No enhanced due diligence, no extra oversight, just the normal flow of business. And what a flow it was. Between 2007 and 2008, HSBC Mexico shipped $7 billion in physical United States currency to its American affiliate. That is billion with a B. Cash. Actual paper bills. Transported in armored trucks and cargo planes. More physical dollars than any other Mexican bank, including institutions twice its size. The United States State Department noticed. They issued warnings. They pointed to Culiacan, the capital of Sinaloa state, the beating heart of the cartel. They noted that a significant portion of the dollars flowing through HSBC Mexico originated there. They asked questions that should have been obvious. Where is this money coming from? Who is depositing it? Why are the volumes so high? HSBC's answer was silence, or worse than silence, compliance. In Culiacan, the cartel's operation was almost comically brazen. Operatives would arrive at HSBC branches with boxes of cash. Not briefcases, boxes. These boxes had been carefully measured to slide precisely under the teller windows. The dimensions were exact. This was not improvisation. This was engineering. Hundreds of thousands of dollars would move through a single account in a single day, millions in a week. The tellers accepted it. The branch managers looked away. The compliance officers, if there were any, said nothing. Between 2006 and 2008, HSBC Mexico exported more than $1.1 billion in physical currency from Sinaloa state alone. The cash was bundled, transported, and deposited into the American banking system, where it became clean, legitimate, spendable. This was not a failure of detection. This was a feature of the system. But there were warnings. There are always warnings. In 2005, a compliance officer named David Bagley sent an email to Stephen Green. The subject was urgent. There were two matters, he wrote, of significant seriousness and potential repercussions. One involved Burma, a country under strict American sanctions. The other involved transactions that carried what Bagley called significant risk of financial penalty. Green received the email. The record shows he responded, but nothing changed. The accounts stayed open, the money kept moving. In 2007, another warning, this time from Mexico itself. Police raided the home of a man named Zhenli Yegong in the Lomas de Chapultepec neighborhood of Mexico City. Inside, they found $205 million in cash. $205 million. The bills were stacked in closets, stuffed into filing cabinets, piled in a locked room. It took authorities 2 full days just to count it. Zhenli Yegong was a Chinese-Mexican businessman who imported precursor chemicals for methamphetamine production. He was a long-standing client of HSBC Mexico. His transactions had triggered internal alerts as early as 2003. Headquarters in London had ordered the Mexican branch to terminate the relationship. The order was never followed. The account stayed open. The money kept flowing. And when the raid made international headlines, when photographs of cash mountains appeared on front pages around the world, HSBC said nothing, did nothing, moved on. The pattern repeated. Currency exchange houses linked to the cartels, front companies purchasing aircraft for drug transport, accounts held by individuals with no legitimate source of income depositing millions in unexplained cash. A company called Casa de Cambio Puebla used HSBC accounts to wire money that bought a fleet of 13 airplanes, DC-9s, Falcons, Super King 200s. These planes were later seized by the DEA, loaded with cocaine. HSBC's internal client compliance committee met to discuss the relationship. Representatives from the commercial banking division argued against closing the accounts. The director, they said, had knowledge of the business and agreed to maintain it. The committee voted unanimously to continue the relationship. This was not negligence. This was decision-making, and still, the system might have held. The regulators might have remained asleep, the money might have continued to flow through the arteries of global finance. anonymous and untraceable. But someone was watching. Someone always is. The El Dorado Task Force was a joint operation between the Departments of Justice, Treasury, and Homeland Security. Their specialty was following money. Not drugs, not guns, money. And by 2010, they had traced streams of cash from the streets of American cities, across the border into Mexico, through HSBC branches, into the Cayman Islands, and back again. The scale was staggering. The evidence was overwhelming. And for the first time, the United States government was prepared to do something about it. On July 17th, 2012, the Senate Permanent Subcommittee on Investigations released its report. 339 pages, hundreds of internal documents, emails, meeting minutes, compliance records. Senator Carl Levin, Democrat of Michigan, opened the hearing with a summary that read like an indictment. HSBC, he said, used its U.S. bank as a gateway into the American financial system for affiliates around the world. It played fast and loose with banking rules. It exposed the United States to Mexican drug money, suspicious travelers, checks, bearer share corporations, and rogue jurisdictions. The bank's compliance culture, Levin concluded, has been pervasively polluted for a long time. The executives testified, they apologized, they expressed regret. Irene Dorner, president and CEO of HSBC Bank USA, said, "We deeply regret and apologize for the lapses." Stuart Gulliver, Group CEO, promised reforms, new leadership, new controls, a new culture. And then David Bagley, the man who had warned Stephen Green 7 years earlier, announced his resignation. He would remain at the bank, he said, in a new role. The senators asked questions. They demanded accountability. They threatened consequences. But behind closed doors, a different conversation was taking place. By the fall of 2012, the Department of Justice had prepared a list of charges. 175 criminal counts. The evidence was there. The admissions were on record. Prosecutors in the asset forfeiture and money laundering section believed they had a case. And then they received a letter. It came from George Osborne, the Chancellor of the Exchequer, Britain's chief financial minister. It was addressed to Ben Bernanke, Chairman of the Federal Reserve, and Timothy Geithner, Secretary of the Treasury. The letter was simple and direct. Prosecuting HSBC, Osborne warned, could have very serious implications for financial and economic stability, particularly in Europe and Asia. A conviction could trigger a loss of the bank's U.S. charter. It could cause a run. It could spread. The word he used was contagion. The letter did not contain evidence. It did not offer data. It simply asserted, with the full weight of the British government, that HSBC was too important to be held accountable, and the Americans blinked. On December 11th, 2012, the Department of Justice announced its settlement. HSBC would pay $1.92 billion in fines and forfeitures, the largest penalty in the history of the Bank Secrecy Act. But there would be no indictment, no criminal prosecution, no executives facing trial. Instead, the bank would enter a deferred prosecution agreement. For 5 years, an independent monitor would oversee compliance reforms. If HSBC behaved, the charges would be dismissed. Assistant Attorney General Lanny Breuer stood before the cameras and explained, "Our goal here," he said, "is not to bring HSBC down. It is not to cause a systemic effect on the economy. It is not for people to lose thousands of jobs." He did not mention the thousands of people who had lost their lives. He did not mention the bodies in the mass graves outside Culiacan. He did not mention the families destroyed by addiction, the communities ravaged by violence, the law enforcement officers murdered by cartels flush with cash that HSBC had helped legitimize. He mentioned jobs. He mentioned the economy. He mentioned stability. And with that, the matter was closed. The fine, enormous as it sounded, represented approximately 5 weeks of HSBC's profits. Analysts calculated that for a man with $100 in his pocket, it was the equivalent of a 7-cent penalty. The stock price barely moved. On the day the settlement was announced, HSBC shares rose. Senator Elizabeth Warren, Democrat of Massachusetts, asked the question that no one in the Justice Department seemed willing to answer. How many billions of dollars do you have to launder, she demanded, before someone will consider shutting down a bank? No one gave her a direct response. And what of Stephen Green, the ordained priest, the author of Good Value, the man who had received David Bagley's warnings and done nothing? In 2010, Prime Minister David Cameron announced that Green would join the government as Minister of State for Trade and Investment. He was given a seat in the House of Lords. He became Baron Green of Hurstpierpoint. The money laundering had occurred on his watch. The warnings had come to his inbox. The decisions had been made while he sat in the chairman's office. But Stephen Green was not called to testify before the Senate. He was not asked to explain. He refused to answer questions from British journalists. When pressed in Parliament, he declined to comment on the business of HSBC, past or present. He remained a minister in Her Majesty's government, a colleague of George Osborne, a lord of the realm. The 5-year probation period passed without incident. In December 2017, the Department of Justice filed a motion to dismiss the charges. HSBC, the government declared, had lived up to all of its commitments. The bank released a statement. The reforms, it said, were sustainable. The culture had changed. But investigative journalists at the International Consortium of Investigative Journalists and BuzzFeed News were not convinced. They obtained thousands of suspicious activity reports filed by banks with the Treasury Department between 2012 and 2017. The exact period of HSBC's probation, what they found was damning. HSBC had continued to move money for shell companies with no identifiable owners. It had processed transactions for firms later revealed to have laundered stolen government funds from Brazil. It had worked with a bank in Transnistria, a breakaway territory of Moldova, for years after the Treasury Department issued warnings about money laundering risks. During the very period when an independent monitor was supposed to be ensuring compliance, HSBC processed at least $4.2 billion for a money laundering network operating out of Hong Kong. Former compliance officers described a culture of willful blindness. They said they lacked resources to investigate suspicious transactions. They said requests for basic customer information from overseas branches were ignored. One former officer summarized it simply: nothing is actually being done. But by then, it was too late. The deferred prosecution agreement had expired. The criminal charges had been dismissed with prejudice. HSBC could never be prosecuted for these offenses again. The bank walked away clean. Joaquin Guzman Loera was not so fortunate. In 2016, after 2 dramatic prison escapes, El Chapo was captured for the final time by Mexican Marines in Los Mochis, Sinaloa. He was extradited to the United States in January 2017. In July 2019, a federal jury in Brooklyn convicted him on all counts: drug trafficking, money laundering, murder conspiracy, weapons charges. The judge sentenced him to life in prison plus 30 years. He was ordered to forfeit $12.6 billion. He is currently held at ADX Florence, the federal supermax facility in Colorado. He will never see the outside world again. The bank that washed his money is still in business. Pull back. Consider the architecture. A cartel leader sits in a concrete cell, alone, for the rest of his life. The bankers who made his empire possible received bonuses. Some had portions deferred, none went to prison. A fine was paid. It was absorbed. It was written off as a cost of doing business. A priest who wrote about morality became a lord. He was never questioned under oath. A chancellor intervened to protect a bank from prosecution. He faced no consequences. The Department of Justice prepared 175 criminal charges. They shelved them on the advice of foreign officials and the fear of market disruption. The system did not fail. The system performed exactly as designed. There is a phrase that circulated in the aftermath: too big to jail. It was meant as criticism. It was taken as instruction. Because here is the lesson that HSBC taught every bank in the world. If you are large enough, if your operations span enough borders, if enough governments depend on your stability, you can do anything. You can process wire transfers for Iranian nuclear programs. You can move money for Sudanese warlords. You can serve as the private vault for the most violent criminals on earth. And when you are caught, when the evidence is undeniable, when your own executives admit to the crimes in public testimony, the worst that will happen is a fine, a payment, a number on a balance sheet. The fine is not punishment. The fine is permission. The families of the dead do not see it that way. In 2016, relatives of Americans killed by Mexican cartels filed a lawsuit against HSBC. They argued that the bank's money laundering had materially supported terrorism. They described the murders in clinical detail. The wedding in Ciudad Juarez, where 16 cartel gunmen opened fire. The ICE agent Jaime Zapata, killed on a Mexican highway while 100 rounds were fired into his armored vehicle. The embassy worker Leslie Enriquez Redelfs and her husband Arthur shot dead after leaving a birthday party with their infant daughter. The lawsuit sought accountability. It sought acknowledgement. It sought, at minimum, a trial. The case was eventually dismissed. And so we are left with the architecture, the structure that remains after the bodies are buried and the headlines fade and the money continues to flow. A global banking system designed to move capital across borders with minimal friction. A regulatory apparatus designed to appear vigilant while remaining permissive. A prosecutorial framework that treats the destruction of communities as less concerning than the disruption of markets. HSBC is not an anomaly. It is a feature. Wachovia laundered $420 billion from Mexican cartels. The fine was $160 million, less than 2% of 1 year's profit. Standard Chartered processed transactions for Iran, $667 million. ING Bank violated sanctions, $619 million. The pattern is consistent. The lesson is clear. In Culiacan, the capital of Sinaloa, they still remember. The journalist Javier Valdez, who spent his life documenting the violence, once described what it felt like to live beside the cartel. "You see the building," he said, "the office, the cars, the papers, the men in suits. Everything looks legal. That's what frightens us." In May 2017, gunmen shot Javier Valdez 12 times outside the offices of his newspaper. He had been reporting on the money. Following the same streams that flowed through HSBC, he was 50 years old. The question is not why this happened. The mechanisms are transparent. The incentives are obvious. The decisions are documented. The question is what it tells us about the systems we have built, about the values we have chosen, about the distance between the words we speak and the world we permit. Stephen Green wrote that the kingdom of God could be found in the thick of the markets. Perhaps he was right. Perhaps this is exactly what the kingdom looks like. A bank that launders money for murders and pays a fine. A lord who retreats to silence. A cartel boss who rots in Supermax. A journalist who dies on a sidewalk in Sinaloa. The market does not distinguish between clean money and blood money. It only distinguishes between profit and loss. And HSBC reported a profit of $16.8 billion in 2011, the year before the settlement. December 11th, 2017. Exactly 5 years after the deferred prosecution agreement was signed. The Department of Justice filed its motion. The charges were dismissed. HSBC released a statement. The reforms, they said, were working. The culture had changed. Stuart Gulliver, the CEO, expressed satisfaction. "We are pleased," he said, "that our progress in strengthening our anti-money laundering and sanctions compliance capabilities has been recognized. There was no ceremony, no press conference, no acknowledgement of what the bank had done. Just a motion filed in a federal courthouse in Brooklyn, a line in a court docket, a door closing. And somewhere, in a branch in some high-risk jurisdiction, another box slid under a teller window. Exactly the right dimensions.